All right, let us begin, and Riley will have to join us as we go. Um, so the Gemara at the beginning of Yud Gimel Amid Aleph is dealing with the question of uh, at what age is it possible for someone to be an adult? To have a child, and does that constitute a sign of adulthood? And therefore, the question is it possible for someone to do miyun, which is a disavowal or a reneging on the marriage, which is a rabbinic marriage, and also have a child. So the Gemara says two versions here, and this is an important conversation because we know girls at the age of 12 and boys at the age of 13 become halachic adults. They become obligated mitzvahs and count as adults. But the Gemara says it's not only in the age, but it also simanim. And simanim generally would mean signs, indications of adulthood, so maturity. So essentially what we would say is that it's not specifically the age, it's also not specifically a particular symbol, a sign of the maturity in adulthood, but rather it is the combination of these. However, we have here a scenario where this girl gives birth, and the question is she's, let's say, 11 or 12, and we don't know whether that's a siman or not. So the first opinion, the Gemara says, "Banim areim kisimanim," or adivim kisimanim, that having a child in and of itself is proof, is better than a sign. So if you have any particular signs of puberty, such as hair growing, which the Gemara says is a siman, is a sign of adulthood, of maturity. Having children will be the same. By the way, over here on the Daf, it says that it is becoming pregnant. Rambam says it's giving birth. It's interesting. Why would the becoming pregnant not be enough of a sign of maturity? In any case, but we have in the second opinion, which is the beginning of our Daf, he says something else. You can't have children without simanim, meaning the children in and of itself would not be a sign of maturity. But there's no such thing as having children and not having simanim, not having what we call signs of puberty, which would be hairs. So what is the meaning here? The Farshim will deal with why would you need other signs together with that, or why would you not just say this is a sign as much as that's a sign? If it's all just an indication of maturity, an indication of development, so why would one indication be greater than the other indication? That's the question. And from there, it seems that Rabbi Tzvi holds, as opposed to the first opinion, that hairs are not an indication of maturity, but they themselves are the definition of creating adulthood. It's a very interesting thing. We know in halacha that there are two types of testimony, edus, that can be given. There is edus, testimony that just requires a knowledge and understanding of information. And for that, women, men, servants, they can all testify because all we need is the information. So the question is this kosher or not? Anybody can testify to that because we just need a knowledge. And then there are certain things that require not the knowledge. The knowledge may be there, but it requires a procedural testimony in Beis Din. Procedural testimony is specific, and for that it has to be two male adults, etc. Al pi shnayim edim yakum davar. Now, the Gemara has an interesting conversation in the Sanhedrin. Can one pair of two witnesses testify that they saw one hair on this maturing a child, and that's not enough as a sign of maturity? And then another two witnesses will say, we saw another hair on that maturing person. And then combined, you now have two hairs, and that would testify and that would be enough testimony to say that this child is really an adult and halachically obligated in mitzvahs for whatever the cases would be. So the Gemara says that doesn't count because al pi shnayim edim yakum davar v'lo chatzi davar. It has to be that it will establish a complete matter and not a partial matter. Now, for sure, if the halacha is simply to understand, to have the knowledge, is this child an adult or not? Then you don't need two witnesses, and you don't need you don't need them to testify about the whole thing. Any amount of testimony would be sufficient, because it's not testimony in the function in the procedural testimony. It's in knowledge. And anybody can testify for that. And any form of knowledge would be sufficient for that. From there, the Shita Mekubetzes tells us that we see from this that, like the indication of the Gemara here, that actually the hairs are not a sign that there is a maturity, but they are themselves the definition, the what makes the maturity. And since it is what makes and defines this child as an adult, therefore it needs procedural testimony. So we have two opinions in the Gemara, and really this is an important understanding of what is the structure of becoming an adult. Is it that you need a particular development within the child so that they now count as an adult? And one of these things would be having at least two, or according to Yehuda, many hairs, or body hairs, or do we say no? Those are only signs of puberty or maturity. And the actual maturity is the totality of the child becoming an adult. And we're just looking for various signs and proofs for that. So the first opinion would say, Rav Safra would say, well, actually, any sign is enough that the body is matured, and that's all we're looking for. And therefore, becoming pregnant would be a sign. Hairs would be a sign. Whereas Rav Zvid says, no, there is a requirement to have specifically this form of identification for adulthood. And once somebody has that, they are defined as an adult. And therefore, even becoming pregnant, he says, it's not in and of itself a sign of adulthood, because we're not looking for a sign. We need a specific marker. Rather, what he says is, since pregnancy would never come with someone who doesn't already have body hairs growing, therefore, in and of itself, it's not a proof, but it is a proof in as much as I now know that the required or the requisite sign is there. So that's a distinction here. It's a very unique idea in what is the definition of adulthood, of having matured. Is it the symbols and signs, or is it an actual marker that would define that?
Is there an explanation for why, meaning it seems like it would be very easy to understand if you say that it's a sign, then really we're looking for some form of maturity, right? The Torah is expects people who are mature to do mitzvos, but before you're mature, right, you're not. So that would be an easy way to understand it, is just that really we're looking for maturity, and this just indicates who's mature enough or who's old enough for the Torah to apply to. In this new way of looking at things, I guess the Rabbi Tzvi way, where it's the actual thing itself is making you more mature. Like, is there any explanation for why the Torah would expect someone specifically with hairs to keep mitzvos and someone without hairs not to keep mitzvos?
Yeah, there's a discussion about that, as well as like where did this come from, and what happens if this comes at an earlier age? What happens if this comes at 8, 9, 10? It's an interesting thing that there's poskim say that earlier generations, children were maturing much earlier. It seems today also it's coming back into a certain way that there's a significant percentage of the population is maturing at a much younger age, sometimes as young as 8 or 9. So those are, that's very young. And for whatever reasons, there are theories out there. But the point is, the question is it just a sign and symbol, or is it an actual requirement? And then where would it come from? The Rush over here and elsewhere says that it's halacha mashmi Sinai. Like all measures, for those that did Daf Yomi this morning, Daf Yomi, we learned that shiurim mechitzin v'chatzitzin halacha mashmi Sinai, and so shiurim measures are halacha mashmi Sinai, and this is a measure. This is a form of what age this is this maturity. By the way, an interesting thing that some Sefer holds that this is only in particular to Jews. Non-Jews become mature at the age that they become mature, whenever it is, and so the halacha mashmi Sinai, it has to be at 12 and 13, and it has to have the sign. And before that, it wouldn't count. Shanim v'simanim, years plus the simanim, is particular to Jews. According to some Sefer, what you would have is somebody who is maybe matured at the age of 9, and at 10 converted, and they went from being an adult to being a child, halachically. Or that at 9 they are old enough that they can make a decision on their own to convert. Yeah, very interesting ideas, but the concept, the question you're asking is very good. Like, where does this come from? And there are different rishonim that have different interpretations, but ultimately we're going to go with the Rush over here, who says that it is halacha mashmi Sinai. That's the tradition we have from Sinai. That's what it is. And therefore, it's at 12, at 13, and that's it. The next Gemara talks about how do we know litzra? How do we know that tzara is usher? So really, this Gemara was already brought in the previous Gemaras when we're trying to figure out what is the reason that we even need a pasuk, and what is the reason that we would have to say that it's why would I think that they could do this mitzvah, right? As we saw for many pages. So here the Gemara says, it says litzra to tell you that not only the erva itself, the prohibited wife of the brother, but also the sister wife of that one would also be prohibited. Rav Ashi Amar Svarihi. Rav Ashi says it's a logical conclusion. My time asir the makam erva kaima. Why is it prohibited? Because the marriage of Reuven, who's deceased, to Rachel, who was prohibited, cannot pass over, and she, as a sister wife within that marriage, also can't pass over because she's a tzaras erva. Well, then the tzaras tzara would be the same as well. Tzaras tzara nami b'makam erva kaimi. She is now in a place of erva because the wife may not have yibum, so too she can't have yibum. And we talked about this at length in the first few daf to explain that Rabbi Kiva Eger's question: what do we need a specific teaching for tzaras tzara? After all, if as long as there cannot be a mitzvah of yibum, then the original prohibition of it's a brother's wife remains, and this is going to be relevant a little bit of the Gemara again. The structure is, as soon as Reuven marries a woman, all of the brothers are prohibited with this woman, or this woman is prohibited to all the brothers as a brother's wife forever. And it's only if there's a mitzvah that either becomes suspended or superseded by the mitzvah. But either way, that's only if there's a mitzvah. If there's no mitzvah, then the original prohibition remains. And so too for the tzara, for the sister wife, once there's no mitzvah, meaning there's no passage of the transference of the marriage from the deceased brother to the surviving brother. Well, if there's no transference, so that prohibition remains. So of course, the next one would be a tzaras erva as well. Man, we saw a few answers and interpretations, but here's the place where that it comes up. Ketzad mesu hey. So the Gemara says, what cases are we talking about? So we said one of the cases is we had Reuven is married to a woman, and that's an erva to his brother. So maybe he married his brother's daughter. Okay. So Reuven and Shimon, two brothers, and he marries his brother's. Reuven marries Shimon's daughter. Now, obviously, Reuven is prohibited. Shimon is prohibited to Reuven's wife. It's his own daughter. Now, Reuven takes his second wife, not related to anyone. So they were co-wives at a certain point, and then he divorces the erva. Do we say that now, when he dies childless, that the tzaras erva cannot do yibum? After all, for a moment, for some time during their life, they were in a marriage together with with an erva. So that's a Gemara. Kanas l'b'sev girish. Even if he first married the co-wife and then divorced the erva, and still it'll be okay. So for a minute we ask a question. Gimel achim. So here's a case of three brothers. Shnai mehen nesuyim beis achayis. Two of them are married to sisters. Now, once they married sisters, there's a prohibition anyhow, right? So Reuven and Shimon marry Rachel and Leah. Besides for being the brother's wife, it is also the wife's sister for each one of them. But the third brother, Levi, marries someone else not related to the two sisters. And now one of the brothers who is who's married to one of the sisters, so Reuven, who's married to Rachel, divorces Rachel. And now Levi, who is married to just somebody else not related, now divorces his wife. And now he dies. So we have Reuven and Shimon. Reuven was married to a sister. Shimon was married to a sister, Rachel and Leah. Levi, who is married to someone else out there, dies childless, and this someone out there now has to have yibum done by one of the two brothers. The Megarish, the one Reuven who had already previously divorced one of the two sisters, Rachel, that Reuven and Shimon were married to the two sisters, and he divorced the one, and he now did yibum on this woman out there, a different woman, and now he dies. Zuhi Shamru she'emesa and his garshin tzarasei mutaris. Here's where we say that the second wife, never having been in the marriage together with the erva at the same time, does yibum. Time of the girish v'achakanas. It's only because he divorced the erva prior to having married this sister, meaning they were never co-wives at the same time. But if they were, he couldn't do he couldn't do it. So here the Gemara is going to give us an answer, which takes us to a fundamental point, which we mentioned at the beginning, and I would just want to highlight it again. The structure of Yibum is Reuven marries a woman, any woman that it may be. Reuven marries a woman, and now he dies childless, and he has brothers. His marriage is transferred over to the surviving brother. That's the structure of Yibum. His marriage transferred over to the other one. The Gemara says, okay, very nice. At what point is there a marriage? The Shimon, the recipient of the brother's marriage, at what point is that transfer made? Or really, let's say it this way, at what point does he marry this woman? Do we say that the Zika, at the moment of the death of the brother, his marriage transfers over to him? That's called Misa Mapelas. It is the death that makes it fall, that makes the marriage transfer to the other brother, to the surviving brother. Or do we say, no, you need an act of kiddushin, you need a chuppah, you need a moment of creating the marriage. At which moment was the marriage created? Way back when the deceased brother married this woman, that's when the kiddushin was effective. If that's transferred over, so then kiddushin rishona mapelas. It is the original act of kiddushin of the deceased brother that makes marriage to the surviving brother. Essentially, what this says is like this: when a person does kiddushin to a woman, what he's saying to her is, "Harayat mukadeshus li," you are betrothed to me. We are married, in as much as that we are bonded to each other. You are committed to me and prohibited to any other man. Besides for if I die childless, then my kiddushin that I'm doing now with you transfers to my brother. The original kiddushin is what passes on to the brother. And what distinction does that have? Many distinctions, but in here in our Gemara, if at any point there was an erva in that marriage, then it couldn't pass over. So even though that happened way back when, but if at any time there was a co-erva with this woman, she couldn't do yibum. Even if at the time of the deceased, the death of the deceased, even if at the time that kiddusha was gone anyhow, because he had divorced the erva. Nevertheless, and since it was the original kiddushin that is being passed, that can no longer be passed because there's an erva in the marriage, and there's a wife of an erva. That's what this Gemara is saying. Kiddushin rishona mapelas. The original act of kiddushin is what's going to transfer into the marriage to the surviving brother. However, the simpler way, and this is the way we actually go, and the Gemara is saying is that the idea is that no, it's the death of the brother who first married this woman that now transfers the kiddushin over to a surviving brother in order to establish his name because he died childless. That is the moment of the transfer, and that's this Gemara. Tana Savar, Hi Tana Savar, kiddushin misam apelas. This opinion says that it is the death of the brother that causes the kiddushin to pass over. The Hi Tana Savar is rishonim apelas. And the other opinion says, no, it's the original kiddushin that passes over. That passes to the surviving brother. Now we get to the next Mishnah. This is a very interesting Mishnah for many reasons. So first case, really, the Gemara gives us a case that's not really Yibum. Essentially, it says that if someone else, not related to Yibum, is married to someone that you're not allowed to be married to anyhow, and has a sister wife, and then that person dies, you're allowed to marry the sister wife because there was no relationship to Yibum. There's no possibility to Yibum anyhow. There are 6 erva that's even more strict, which are married to someone else. Yet you're allowed to marry the tzara, the sister wife of that marriage. For instance, imo, his mother, his father's wife, and his the father's sister, Achosa me'aviv, his sister from his father's paternal sister. Ve'eshes achiyaviv, ve'eshes achim me'aviv, the wife of his uncle, his father's brother, or the wife of his brother from his father. Either way, the idea is that these are not an erva state in any case, not a yibum state in any case, and therefore, if the marriage ends, you can marry, obviously not the erva, but the sister. Here, the Gemara is going to throw in a shocking change. We went through 11, or amidst of the 12th daf of the Masechta, and the entire time we're talking about that if somebody has a mitzvah of doing yibum, his brother died childless, the widow is to be married with yibum in order to reestablish the brother's household. That's the mitzvah. And if you're not allowed to marry that woman because she's an erva, so then even any other wife in that marriage yibum cannot be done. That's what we've been going throughout the Masechta. And here the Mishnah says, oh, by the way, Beis Shammai doesn't agree to that concept at all. They say there is a mitzvah yibum on the tzara, on the sister wife. Beis Shammai matirin hatzaris, and even though the word is matirin, it means they obligate. If it's permissible, then there's an obligation. Hatzaris la'achim, to any of the brothers. Well, Beis Hillel, it's Beis Hillel to say that it's prohibited. And as the Gemara is going to tell us, Beis Shammai do not follow this idea of tzaras erva, the tzara of the sister wife of an erva being prohibited to you. And this has ramifications, as the Mishnah said. If you do chalitza, the chalitza doesn't really work according to Beis Hillel, so she can still marry a Kohen. According to Beis Shammai, the chalitza does work, which is the ending of the marriage. It's basically a divorce, and a Kohen may not marry a divorcee. Various other halachic ramifications, and it has enormous ramifications for a mamzer. It can create a mamzer because is she prohibited to someone or not? Is there a real erva here or not? According to Beis Shammai, there is a mitzvah to do yibum for this woman. According to Beis Hillel, not only is there no mitzvah, it's an erva prohibition. It's a brother's wife. And if they have children afterwards, that child would be a mamzer. The Mishnah says something spectacular. And even though that the students of Beis Shammai said it's permissible to do a yibum, and therefore they would do yibum, and the students of Beis Hillel said it's prohibited, and therefore would be considered the child of such a marriage would be a mamzer, and prohibited. And nevertheless, Leinimnu Beis Shammai milisa nashim mi Beis Hillel. The students of Beis Shammai and the students of Beis Hillel would intermarry into each other's families. And also similarly, even though that they had many differences in halacha in regards to Tumah and Tahara, what is a pure vessel, what's not. They would not hold back from keeping that which they're trying to keep tahor and using vessels from the other. So Rashi explains, and the reason for this that they wouldn't hold back is because they would notify each other who is prohibited. So Beis Shammai is coming to make a shidduch with someone from Beis Hillel and say, by the way, according to your opinion, you can't marry into my family, so let's stay away. That's what they would say. It's a fascinating, spectacular thing. I respect your opinion so much that even though I disagree, and based on your opinion, my family structure is a totally prohibited family structure. I respect you and you respect me. Because we're learning Torah, we're seeking truth enough that even though to you, my family is a prohibited structure, okay, we respect each other. And I will tell you, don't do this. And it's astonishing. And it has a practical idea in halacha as well. You come to eat at someone's home. The halacha is, if they are people that have ne'emanis, people that are trustworthy in halacha, then you can eat there. Even if you know that they have opinions that are different than yours. Why? Not because when you go to their house, you can be lenient, but because you know that they will tell you, oh, don't eat that. That's not to your standard. That's not something you want to partake in. I wish we can say that that is true today, right? If only. For some things, maybe, right? If you come to someone's house and I could call Yisro, so you come to someone's house, they would say, oh, don't eat that. That's not Chal Yisro. I think that would be the case. But in some things, we're much more sensitive. And the Mishnah is telling us that the Mishnah wants us to know and learn from this. That they, even though they were great Talmidei Chachamim, they were giants of men, and they would say, "Oh, you can't come into my family because I wish you would, but according to your opinion, this is prohibited. According to your opinion, what I have here is tummy. I hold it to be Torah, but you hold it not to be. So by your standard, this is not kosher for you. Don't eat it. By your standard, and it's not good enough, and therefore don't do it." And the halacha that the Ramah says is that you can therefore go to people's homes and do that. And if we trust each other to that degree, we'd say, look, I don't know if you want to eat that because that meat is not a hechsher that you would eat, or that product may not be, to your standard. Then you can go and eat it because you know that they wouldn't feed you something like this. It also teaches us something that we can do. That if we know somebody has a standard, to honor that and respect that, and even if it is, stricter than us, but not to feel defensive and offended, but to say thank you so much. It is such a blessing and such a bracha to have you here. I remember it's about a decade ago that there was a wonderful Hasidic fellow who came from Brooklyn, and he was he came here to check wheat in midsummer to see whether it would be good for the hand matzah that they make in certain communities on the East Coast. And he came here to select them and see them. And he wouldn't make it back to Brooklyn for Shabbos. So he was going to go to a hotel, and I called him. I said, it would be a shame for you to have a Shabbos in a hotel when you can have a Shabbos in a home. He said, no, I don't want to come because I don't want to offend you. I don't eat in anybody's house. I brought along my own pot, I'm going to just eat out of my own thing, and I don't want to be in your house and not eat. So I said, it would be my pleasure. Come, and whatever you want, you'll eat. Whatever you don't want, you don't eat. I'll make space on my blech and make your stuff. And he did. He came. He wouldn't even use my paper plates. It was fascinating. Well, it's an exaggeration. He ate my paper plates, but he wouldn't eat a thing that we made in our house. Cold water from the sink was about it. But we had a wonderful Shabbos together. The ability to be able to respect someone else's opinions, even when it seems like belittling me. There is no greater belittling than what Beis Shammai's opinion, Beis Hillel opinion said about Beis Shammai. According to Beis Hillel, these families that followed Beis Shammai were mamzer, was a prohibited marriage and a structure, a prohibited family. And yet they didn't stop interacting with respect and appreciation. And that's something that is a valuable lesson to learn in this teaching. We just have a little bit more time. I'd like to jump ahead to the question of why did Beis Shammai, the second reason the Gemara gives as to why, according to Beis Shammai, they said that there is no prohibition of the tsaras erva. So again, what does this mean? Reuven, who is the deceased brother, was married to two people. One of those women is prohibited to Shimon, his brother. In any case, maybe it's his daughter, maybe it's his mother, whatever it may be. It's his relative, and therefore, in any case, they may not be married. the tzara, the sister wife, is going to be prohibited as well. And there's no transfer of yibum. That's according to Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai say, actually, you could. So the question is why? So here the Gemara brings us to a concept that we haven't yet seen really here, and it's a fascinating and important concept in Allah. Ein Isser Chalal Isser. Something that's already prohibited, another prohibition cannot come upon. So, the prohibition over here is going to be that there was already a prohibition of erva, and therefore the prohibition of the other erva cannot take effect. Meaning, when Reuven, the first brother that's deceased now, married this woman who in any case was prohibited to Shimon, now there's no prohibition of that of Achos Isha, of the Eshesach, of the brother's wife. That takes effect, and therefore it doesn't prohibit the sister wife, the tzara, because there is no prohibition. So essentially what the Gemara is saying is a fascinating thing. When Reuven marries Shimon's daughter, what's the prohibition of, and this is not with the Yibum or anything, every time somebody marries a woman, what's the prohibition of that married woman to her father? Well, one, it's his daughter, obviously prohibited. But also she's a married woman. The Gemara says, no, Ein Isser Chal Isser, something that's already prohibited, another prohibition cannot take effect on that. So she, to the father, she's not a married woman. Well, she's married, but that's not the reason for the prohibition of cohabitation. It is on account of the original first prohibition. It's his daughter, and therefore, that secondary, late coming prohibition of being a married woman doesn't take effect. Being his brother's wife will not take effect. And this is a fascinating thing. So based on that, why don't we say that that actually a yibum should take effect, because it was never the prohibition of the brother's wife is never there. Shimon, well, I don't want to get into it. It's going to be complicated. The concept over here is Enes Echala. Listen, that's an important one. That the reason Beis Shammai say that the sister wife is permitted in Yibum is because actually the first wife is not prohibited on the basis of being the brother's wife. Therefore, there's no marriage to be transferred to the brother, because that doesn't happen. There is no prohibition that ends and is passed on to the brother. That's the concept over here of Beis Shammai, and the fascinating idea of Ein Isser Chalal Isser. There is a discussion in Tosfos here and many other avenues of looking at this. When we say Ein Isser Chalal Isser, that there's already a prohibition and therefore another prohibition cannot come and take effect, does that mean it doesn't take effect at all? Or it takes effect, but simply there are no consequences of it? That's one way of saying it. Or do we say it doesn't take effect, but it's mitli tali? It's hovering over, if we could visualize spirituality. So there's the spiritual prohibition already of Isser A, and Isser B is hovering over but has not yet landed. And as soon as Isser A were to go away, the second one would come and take effect. And therefore, it doesn't allow A to go away, because in any case, B is ready to take effect. That's Tosfos's language, but this is a lengthy conversation that needs to be had in the Eon to really look into understanding the concept of Ein Isser Chalal Isser. When we say that there's a prohibition already and therefore another prohibition cannot take effect, doesn't mean it doesn't take effect at all, doesn't mean it takes effect, but there's no ramification, there's no punishment on account of it, it doesn't have ramifications, or even less, it doesn't take effect at all, it doesn't have ramifications, but it does hover and is waiting and blocking all the rest from going. The last discussion we're going to try and go to is the last Gemara over here. That the Gemara brings in a discussion about the concept of losis losasu taras losasu agudis agudis. Don't split the community. Don't cut into the community by dividing the community. This has many halachic ramifications, and there's a limit to it. But basically, what this says is, in order that, as Rashi explains it, in order that there should not be two Torahs, two halacha, you can't have agudas agudas. You can't make it within one group of people is doing this, and one group of people is doing that. Now, this has a lot of halachic weight. In some places, for instance, either everybody wears tefillin on Chol Hamoed or no one wears tefillin on Chol Hamoed. What happens at Kesser, where some people wear and some people don't, in some places say you can't do that. You can't do that because lis is good to do lisasu agudas agudas. You can't make separate. You can't make it separate Torahs because it'll look like different Torahs. Now, the question on this is because actually in halacha, the halacha says if in one city there are two beis-dins, you are allowed to have each one saying differently. You have to have Beis Shammai Beis Hillel. We'll see a little bit more about this, but you can have one group doing one thing and the other group doing another thing, as long as each one has a separate beis-din. So you see, it's just simply because it's going to look like two Torahs, because that's what the halacha is in any case. You're allowed to have one city do A and one city do B. Now the Gemara asks, well, what about minhagim? And the Gemara says there's a distinction. A minhag, something that's not that's not halacha. So of course everybody can do their own things. But what's an obligation, or perhaps only a Torah obligation, that you cannot have them do it separately. The Rambam adds wording that it's not just on a concept of because it's going to look like two Torahs, that it looks like a split, but more because it's going to cause machlokas. It's going to cause a struggle within the community. Therefore, if each one has a separate beis-din, well, then it's wonderful because this one has a beis-din. So to follow, this one has a beis-din follow. So it's not going to look like a machlokas. We're going to see, okay, they're following their beis-din. They're following their beis-din. Before we get to what qualifies as a beis-din, that is, therefore, the halacha is that whenever people know that this is an established halacha already for a certain group, then there's no less is good to do for them to do it in a place, especially nowadays where we don't really have any one city that has a minhag. All these everywhere it's a melting pot of various minhagim that come from different places, and therefore this one wears tefillin on Chol Hamoed and this one doesn't wear tefillin on Chol Hamoed and can daven in the same shul because everybody knows Sfardim don't wear tefillin on Chol Hamoed, Hasidim don't wear tefillin on Chol Hamoed, and Ashkenazim wear tefillin on Chol Hamoed. And great, so we have that mix. And so if they come from this tradition, they come from that tradition, they're wearing, and it's fine. And therefore you can do it in one place because it won't bring to machlokas. Similarly, they daven Ashkenaz Siddur, Sfard Siddur. Which one? Well, we now know that there are just multiple ways of davening. It's all davening with the same Borei Olam, the creator of the universe, and we daven with the same intent and with the same brachas. And this one has a word like this, and this one has a word like that. It's slightly different, slight differences, but ultimately it's the same tefillah and it's the same davening to Hashem. And the fact that there are changes, we know already that there are these two sidurim, the Siddur Ashkenaz and Sfard, and so you can have them both in the same shul. This is based on Rav Moshe and some other poskim. However, there are those that are much more strict and say, no, you cannot have and based on this Gemara, the Sasa Agudas, you cannot have in one place two things. Yes, you can have if you have a separate beis din, but then it would have to be in a separate place. It would have to be a separate community. Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel, separate. But you can't have them together in one place and doing Agudas, doing a Torah in a split, as a split community. What constitutes as a beis din? So the Mishnah Berurah brings from the Poskim that it would have to be that they have daily minyan 3 times a day with Asara Batlanim. They have 10 people dedicated to do the communal needs of Torah and Tefillah, and Talmud Chacham at its head, etc. So it would require a certain structure. So you can't say just because I'm in a city, well, I follow beis din. No, it has to have a proper structure in order to have that. Next week, Bez Hashem will continue with this conversation, which comes up a lot, and more about Beis Shammai Beis Hillel. But the concept of Melissa Good to do is an important one. It has a lot of halachic ramifications. You cannot, what you cannot do in another community if everybody's doing one thing. Whereas if you have your own community, then you can do it. And that's the idea of not creating machlokes by making the Torah look like 2 separate Torahs. Thank you again, Rabbi Deichman, for the challenge.
I would just like to say, if I'm ever invited to your house for a meal, I'm willing to eat your paper plates.
Please eat my paper plates. They are compostable. But I commit this to you, Bez Hashem. If you ever come to eat at my house when they allow those things again, and I know of something that you have a chumrah that you don't eat something, I will tell you not to eat it if I'm serving, or I won't serve it to you. It's a commitment.
Okay, just so you know, I'm good with paper plates. Okay.
Plastic?
I have noticed that in our current times, I'm seeing a lot of times now you have the same issue with hakpada, with how comfortable or how machmir someone is on COVID itself. The same issue that you've always had with chumras, where perhaps people have differing views on like how machmir someone should be on, let's say, kashrus, and you get that discomfort where someone wants to be more stringent and someone wants to be less stringent, and both sides kind of are uncomfortable with each other. So you see a lot of the same stuff going on now with COVID, where some people might feel that all the rules and 10 times more than that, and some people feel no, throw them all away, and kind of get all the spectrum. And I think that there's a lot
That's
of
a very good comparison. I like that.
We don't hold with Chalav Yisrael, but some time back, our house was the meeting place for kids from the Wilhelm and local Chabad families, kids from the Oppenheimer and the more Machmir Kasser Yisrael family, who were all strict on Chalav Yisrael. So we always had whatever they needed, even though it wasn't our Chumrah. We made sure that our Haknas Rochim was, matim to the needs of our guests, so that we didn't have to say to them, "Oh, you probably wouldn't want this ice cream." This was just we accepted the Chumrah when they were here. Let's put it that way. I don't see why the whole world isn't that way, but what can I say?
If everybody was Aki.
Or Devorah, actually. So.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Yeah.
So you were making a distinction between, this came up, I thought about it, I tried to flesh it out when we were learning this throughout the week, but you made a distinction between things that are halacha and things that are minhagim, but what I'm saying, what does a minhag look like but doesn't have halachic ramification? Is it completely removed from halacha, or?
And of course it has halachic ramifications and halachic obligations, but what is its basis?
What's the difference between a minhag and people who hold different things in halacha? Meaning, if one person think, is it a minhag to wear tefillin on Chol Hamoed or not wear tefillin on Chol Hamoed? Or there's some people the halacha is
that's a halachic obligation.
Some people hold some people the halacha is you should wear tefillin on Chol Hamoed. Some people hold you shouldn't. So what's that?
Correct. Those are that's a halachic obligation. The Torah says to wear tefillin. There's a halachic obligation to wear tefillin.
Right, but what minhag is not like
is there a halacha on that particular day as well or not? But that's a halachic question. A minhag question would be not working on Purim. Right? Not working on Erev Pesach. Right? That's the Gemara. Right? So here you have, there's no halachic obligation not to work. But a lot of people take off work. Some people don't. At what point does it become an established minhag? And if it is a minhag in our town, but not a minhag in the next town, can I go to work in a place where the minhag is not to? That like stuff like that.
Right.
Those are minhagim.
It's like people just use interchangeably.
Sorry?
People sort of use the two interchangeably. They'll be like, people might say, is it your minhag to wear tefillin on Chol Hamoed or not? So that what they're really
yes, vernacular is not always going to be accurate about that. Correct.
There could potentially be like a lower level of minhag where it's, those situations where I'm not doing malacha. I mean, I guess this might be like what Matt's saying with it. The term minhag is vague, but sometimes minhag can just mean like the type of food you eat in a certain time, or something that's like entirely not like rooted in like any form of like there's no like you have to do this. It's just like the Mishnah will bring down like a minhag to do something, right? I guess maybe I don't know. Would that fall into the potential like you would have to do it?
When you go to a place, minhag, you can have a difference of minhag, and it doesn't count as you're creating machlok, or that you're making two Torahs. It's only if you come in and you say, let's see, this particular halacha is different. Not minhag, but this particular halacha is a prohibition that doesn't exist, or a mitzvah that you have an obligation to do. So that's where there would be two Torahs. Even though, like in our case over here, the Yibum is a machlokas. Is it a Torah obligation or a Torah prohibition?